Magnus Carlsen is a Norwegian chess grandmaster and is known to be the youngest chess grandmaster at that time, as he earned that title when he was only 13. Magnus was a world chess champion in 2013, 2014, 2016, and then 2018 as well, where he came out with exemplary skills and talent to perform under pressure. Carlsen remained at the top of the FIDE world rankings for a long period of about 10 years, which was a great achievement and became an unparalleled opponent in chess. But even the top players sometimes lose. These are the quickest losses of Magnus's career. Alexander Morozevich. Carlsen played against Morozevich when he was ranked number 2 during his peak period. The game started when Carlsen moved his pawn to c4, and in response Alexander moved his pawn to e6. The game started and was normally played by both of the players when the game looked like an English opening, which was that the white pawns were at c3 and g4, and the black pawns were at d5 and f6. Alexander takes the white c4 pawn, and in response, Magnus moves his bishop to g2. In this situation, Magnus has castled, but the pieces of Alexander are not developed yet, and he has an extra pawn and moves his pawn to b5 to defend his other pawn c4, which was very weak. After some thought by Magnus, he moves his pawn to a4 to attack the middle pawn of Alexander. Now Alexander moves his bishop to the diagonal, which traded off some pawns, and Magnus also places his bishop to the diagonal. Now Alexander has an advantage, and Magnus was not happy with his position. But later, Magnus started creating an attack on the black king by giving him his rook for a knight, and he made a triple attack on the pawns of Alexander on f7, which he defended by using his queen. After some thinking, Magnus is planning an extremely dangerous attack and moves his knight g4, to which Alexander must defend himself, so he moves his bishop. Magnus moves knight f6, and he wanted his queen to invade Alexander's position, but it was too late. Alexander has too many extra pieces, and he forces another trade with bishop d5, causing Magnus's bishop to his queen, and after a long game, Alexander secures his queen in a corner and threatens checkmate by taking the pawn on h4, therefore leaving Magnus with only one option, which was to resign from the game. Boris Savchenko is a Russian chess player who has won some championships and has competed in a few tournaments throughout his life. In this game, Magnus moves his pawn to e4, and in response, Boris moves to c5, and after a set of moves by both parties, the game turns into a Sicilian defense, where white pawns are on c4 and e4, and the black pawns are on c6 and f6. Magnus moves his bishop to e2, and now both players are at equal positions, and now Magnus tries to create an advantage for himself when Boris develops his bishop. Magnus moves his bishop to e3 to create some difficulty for Boris. Here his plan was to attack after moving his pawn to f4, but this did not seem to affect Boris as he moved his queen to a5, where his rooks are at the back, grouped together, to which Magnus responds by moving his rook to the side, and after thinking quickly, Boris played actively by moving his rook. Magnus starts to attack the pawn, which makes Boris retreat his knight to a safe place, and at this point Magnus makes a blunder and moves his knight to d5. This move made by Magnus gives away a pawn to Boris, which he took using his queen, and in response, Magnus pushes his pawn. But after, Boris moves his knight f6, which was a blunder at his end, and Magnus moves his knight to c3, and then he can move his pawn to b5 at his turn again to win a knight. Boris knew he messed up, so he gave away his knight, and after some moves, the bishops are traded off, and Magnus offers a trade between the queens. This trade is not good for Boris because it's difficult to play the endgame against Magnus, but he had no other option, so he accepted the queen trade and moved his bishop to b6. Boris moves his pawn to f5, in response to which Magnus uses his king to come closer, after which a set of pawns were traded, and Magnus moves his pawn to h3, and Boris brings his king closer. Magnus moves his rook, and then Boris moves his rook to b3. Now both players have equal position, and Boris declines a trade offered by Magnus and attacks the knight. Magnus moves his bishop back, which Boris attacked. With time going down and pressure rising, Boris attacks the bishop and Magnus checks the king of Boris, forcing a trade-off of rook, and after some moves, Boris moves his pawn to c3, where Magnus blocked his queen, and Boris then defends his pawn using the bishop, giving Magnus a little better position than Boris, and a chance to win if he plays carefully. Both parties played some moves, and then Magnus takes the pawn, and then the bishop and rook were traded, leaving Magnus with a rook and 2 pawns, and Boris with a bishop and 4 pawns. It was expected to be a draw if no blunder was made, and they moved their pieces in round till Magnus plays his king to d3, which he thought would defend his pawns from the king of Boris, but it was a blunder. Boris moves his bishop back to e1, and Magnus moves his king to d4, and this allowed Boris to check the king, after which Boris can win a free rook, as well after any move by Magnus, but Magnus instantly moved his king to a better place, just after he had played his move, which was an illegal move which Boris pointed out thus. As it was an illegal move, the next match was even more tiring. If you're liking the video so far, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Chess player in a bar in Norway. This was not some tournament, rather just a match between a random chess player in a bar in Norway and Magnus Carlsen. Carlsen started the game by moving his white piece to e4, and the opponent moved to e5. The game turns to a Roy Lopez opening, where the opponent moved his pawn to e6 to chase away the bishop of Magnus, and the game was going well, until the first mistake was made. The mistake was made by the opponent. He moved his knight to g6, giving the control of the center of the board to Magnus, and with their body posture it could be seen that Magnus was confident about himself, whereas the opponent looked like he was carefully thinking every move. Magnus had an advantage of his pawns that were at the center. Magnus was ready to attack the king side, and was able to take the bishop of the opponent, and if he continued the game as it was, Magnus was very likely to win. But then he realized that he had made a mistake by attacking the knight of the opponent, which urged him to move his knight, and Magnus could use his pawns to capture the bishop. The opponent now knows that he cannot do anything, and can only give away his bishop and traps the pawn. Magnus plays f6. While it would have been better if he played queen g3, opponent moved his queen to e5, which is threatening the mate at h2 square, which is a move to attack through the queen h5, which is another mistake. Again, the opponent is in deep trouble, and his body posture and language show that. He carries on playing the game and moves his rook away to get out of danger. He keeps playing with the hope that something might go his way, and Magnus plays a wrong move by using knight f5, causing the opponent to gain a free pawn, while he is attacking the queen. He realized that he made a blunder by giving off the queen, exactly what another player, Max, did against him in a previous match with Magnus. After this, Magnus immediately resigned from the game, and it could be seen that he was not happy with the circumstances and how the game was played. Which loss was the worst? Let us know in the comments section below, and make sure to like the video. Thanks for watching.